We have witnessed, challenges here and there. Challenges in the sense, in some of our countries, we've seen the civic space shrinking, as in some of our states coming up with law that are maybe anti-CSO. But I wouldn't say that's the rule. Maybe the exception here and there. But I would say, bearing in mind the instruments, bearing in mind the mechanisms which so far have been doing reasonably well, I would say the situation looks good. Of course, even though we have challenges here and there, you would see improvements in some of our countries, like the Gambia, for example, is a very, until about 3 years ago, we really had this dictatorship that lasted for more than 2 decades. And we also know Ethiopia too is now opening up. So I would say, despite challenges here and there, the situation looks a lot better than it was many, many years ago. One of our biggest problems is the speed, like the number of years it takes for some of the cases we file to get decided. I'm like making it relevant to my organization. So I would say those delays, cause us all kinds of problems. And I also think one other big issue we're grappling with is the lack of implementation of judgments and decisions adopted by the mechanisms I referred to earlier on. So you file your case before a particular mechanism. Probably it might take 6, 7 years before the case gets decided. And after it is decided, you also struggle to get it implemented. I think that is really, really one of our biggest challenges. And the final, I would say, would be lack of awareness. We can do a lot of good with our mechanisms. We can do a lot of good with our instruments. But unfortunately, a lot of our people don't know these instruments exist. They also don't know how to use these mechanisms. So I would identify those three: lack of awareness of the, instruments, mechanisms, and like I said, non-implementation of some of these judgments and recommendations. And again, to the number of years it takes to litigate a case successfully before any of the mechanisms. They have done a lot of good, and they are capable of also doing a lot more. If you, for example, look at cases decided by the African Commission, some of them have pushed the boundaries, really very, very progressive, going beyond what is expressly provided for in the Charter. Progressive, and we're just hoping they belong to something like that. Of course, even though we know implementation is a problem, but there have been instances where some recommendations made are fully implemented. So I would say, bearing in mind how, progressive some of the jurisprudence could be, and of course, bearing in mind to how, some of these instruments are contextualized, I believe the mechanisms, irrespective of the challenges I talked about, have done some good, and I think they continue to do so. Because for quite a while, institutions such as the African Commission, served as, the only voice or the only avenue where people whose rights are violated would really have the opportunity to appear, sessions, cases, to really talk about issues that ordinarily are not talked about in the domestic level. I can give the Gambia as an example. At a point when it was almost impossible for anybody to say anything that the former president did not like, or when it was impossible for anybody to take up any case at the domestic level, at that period, for a lot of people, the only avenue available at the time was the commission. That was what led to the former president filing a case against the Gambia before the African court, before the African Commission. And the decision the commission came up with at a time when the highest court in this country was quoted as saying there was no human rights in this country. That decision is very much celebrated around the world. And again, during commission sessions, Gambians or maybe friends of the Gambia who ordinarily wouldn't have had the opportunity to speak up would use the session to come up with statements, put pressure on the African Commission to adopt resolutions. We're not saying the commission is perfect. Of course, there are a lot of frustrations. But at the end of the day, it has over the years done a lot of good, not just for the Gambia, but for other countries. I think, of course, over the years, we really have been putting a lot of emphasis on civil political rights. I am not saying they're not important, they're extremely important. We all, have a right to be free from discrimination, free from ill treatment, etc. But I think some of the issues that are very much ignored, not just in the Gambia, in a lot of our countries, relate to social and economic justice. I believe, all the freedom in the world is meaningless if you really don't have access to social services, if you also don't have access to opportunities. And I would say, I'm not saying we should do away with putting a lot of emphasis on civil political, but I think we should also begin to give economic, social, and cultural rights the prominence they deserve. Because at the end of the day, you've been in the country for a while. Of course, when you interview the average Gambian, they will tell you there are more freedoms, people are a lot freer. But at the end of the day, people will also tell you there is a lot of corruption going on, which really has some very serious implications on the enjoyment of human rights around the continent. So let's, then work towards, eliminating corruption in all four corners of the continent. We also have to concentrate more on economic social justice because they're important. Without it, I don't think we can talk about seeing meaningful changes anywhere in the continent. We had, even during the session, the commission talk about having manpower constraints. Some of us, like I said, have had our cases pending before the commission for years. So what do we expect? We would expect, the AU to make it possible for the commission to have more people so that at least the cases we have filed or the cases we will file would be given the attention they deserve so that instead of having a case pending, for a period of 10 years because probably the, commission does not have enough personnel, we would expect the cases to be looked into, and of course decided as quickly as possible. So I would say if, of course, lack of resources is hindering the commission's work, then we would expect whoever is responsible to do everything possible to make sure the commission is provided the support it needs because for us who litigate, it wouldn't make sense. You believe you can get a remedy at the local level, you go international just for a case to drag on for a period of 10 years. That doesn't make any sense. So we're hoping, of course, whatever that we have to do would be done to provide all these mechanisms with the manpower needed to carry on with their mandate, and with the urgency required.